Good morning. This is David Lee from BMC Software. Thank you for joining the Control-M Cloud Capabilities and Strategies webinar. This will be about an hour long, so feel free to listen along with us, and we'll discuss some interesting capabilities that are coming along with Control-M and some of the things that we've already been doing in cloud today. I would ask, please, that if you have any questions, that you hold them till the end. We'll have a question and answer session so that we can judiciously get through the content in the hour that we have today. And again, thank you for joining. A couple of things that we need to make you aware of. We are going to talk about some of the things that are available today and some of the things that are coming in the next release of Control-M. So we do have to make you aware that the information that is contained in this webinar is confidential, and we would appreciate it if you make sure that if you're going to share this with people that you share the webinar, which we'll provide a link with later this afternoon. So today's agenda is pretty straightforward. We've got 3 sections to discuss. The first is what trends we're seeing in the cloud adoption space when it comes to workload automation, and some of the information that we received back from you, customers who have been using Control-M for quite a long period of time, whose IT infrastructures and IT strategies are evolving to embrace cloud more directly. We'll talk a little bit about what Control-M is doing in the AWS cloud and on the Azure cloud. We'll also discuss a short portion of the cloud control module as well, so that everybody knows that, or at least has an overview of that as well, along with questions and answers that will happen at the end. So let's talk a little bit about some of the trends and some of the things that we've seen back from customers about cloud adoption and what they need to do and what they expect to do. It's a very salient quote at the top of this slide about cloud adoption trends, especially the fact that in many of my travels personally, I've had many conversations with customers who are blatantly telling me they don't want to be in the data center business anymore. And the quote there at the top, by 2020, a corporate no cloud policy will be as rare as no internet policy is today, is very salient in the way that our IT infrastructures are evolving. It used to be no cloud. Nobody trusted the cloud. Nobody put anything on the cloud. Nobody had anything on the cloud. And then it became cloud first. Let's find a way not to do this on our infrastructure. Let's use the cloud first if we can get away with it for new development. And now it's starting to evolve into cloud only, where people are saying, I don't want to put anything on our infrastructure anymore. I want to get out of the data center business, and I want all of our applications to either be developed in the cloud, migrated into the cloud, so that I don't have to worry about the compute assets and the management of those assets as we go forward. When we think about the adoption rates and state of the cloud types of conversations, RightScale's last State of the Cloud report brought up several of these metrics, that 93 to 95% of the organizations are using some kind of cloud technology, whether it's public, whether it's private, or it's a combination of the two in the case of a hybrid cloud. That upwards of 82% of organizations are actually using more hybrid cloud strategies as a migration path to move away from their existing infrastructures. That between 58 and 71% are private cloud adopting with a drive to hybrid. So they've already got something in their environment, in the case of things like VMware and on-premise Azure, that handle their virtualization today, but they want to get away from that infrastructure as well. The other two at the bottom are very salient as well. 50 to 56% of enterprises running applications on AWS. People are embracing the Amazon cloud, and a lot of the platform as a service type, software as a service type offerings that Amazon is providing as part of that AWS platform. And of course, the last one, 12 to 17% are now embracing Azure as well in the cloud from Microsoft. So this move to cloud is not something that is a one-off, right? It's one of those things that really does move people from keeping an on-premise data center to actually working with data centers that would be virtualized in somebody else's compute platform. So when we talk to our customers, we start asking questions about what they're doing with cloud. a lot of the information we got back from the 2016 Workload Automation survey was very salient as well. And again, for those of you that are on the phone, if you would please mute your phones by using *6, that would be helpful as well. 74% of our customers said that they have some kind of cloud application deployment. 40% of that 74 actually have applications in the cloud. The rest are either testing or have plans to do that. There's only a quarter of the respondents that weren't sure or didn't know if they had any plans for cloud adoption as well. And then if we look at the 22% that are already deployed, 43% are deployed in their own data centers, but they don't have a plan to move out to a public cloud. And we thought that was very interesting because there's also 35% that also said that they plan to move to the cloud. It's a very interesting dichotomy as we try as software developers here at BMC to understand how we navigate those waters and how we actually deal with the changing market space, especially when cloud becomes more and more salient, either with a private cloud deployment, a public cloud deployment, or a hybrid cloud deployment. So we know that our customers are moving to cloud, and a lot of them are using different use cases. Where they're actually keeping Control-M, for example, on their own data center, but they're deploying Control-M agents and applications into the cloud and controlling them out there. We have customers that actually have full implementations of Control-M in cloud infrastructures on AWS and Azure and Google and some of the others. And the myriad of environments that we are seeing are pretty much the standard ones that you would expect. We're seeing a lot of Amazon Web Services. We're seeing a lot of Microsoft Azure. We're seeing a lot of the private cloud type of implementations on things like VMware and on-premise Azure. And of course, we see a lot of hybrid cloud as well as people start embracing the move from an on-premise data center type of structure to a more virtualized and a more compute-savvy implementation of a data center. So, where is Control-M today? Well, we've been able to be in the cloud for a very long time. We've been able to install agents in the cloud. We've been able to install full stacks of Control-M in the cloud. We've been able to put different pieces of Control-M in the cloud. When we do those types of things, obviously there are some configuration things we have to take into account and possibly leveraging some of those things in those environments. Prior to September of 2016, Control-M really was just treating the typical Amazon image, the typical Azure image, as a machine like any other. So you would install Control-M on that machine. If you were putting in the Enterprise Manager or the Control-M server on that machine, you would deploy it as if it were an on-premise machine. You would put a database on it. You would have all of the regular components that you wanted in that on that image, and you'd move forward. And a lot of people were okay with that because they wanted to manage their environments that way. However, those that were more savvy about how cloud was being run and what services were being provided by the cloud providers, in the case of Amazon and Azure, came back to us and said, you know what, we really don't want to treat these necessarily as just images of machines in a virtualized environment off of our data center, where they just act like a Linux box or they act like a Windows machine. We want to start leveraging some of the things that the cloud providers give us, especially when we start thinking about database availability and things like that for the platform as a service types of offerings that Azure and AWS are providing. So in September of last year, we started looking at what we were doing in cloud and how we needed to continue to evolve. And one of the first goals was to start improving how compatible we are with cloud infrastructures. And when we started going down that path, we started asking lots of questions of customers about what that meant to them. And many of them had said to us, we really want to start leveraging the platform as a service capabilities that an Amazon or an Azure provide. At the time, most of the customers that we were dealing with that were wanting to do this with Control-M were on AWS. So we started with AWS and started looking at what we needed to do. So in September, we started building new setup capabilities for Control-M, an actual distribution of Control-M that was specifically cloud savvy. So that if I wanted to put Control-M's main components out on the cloud, out on the AWS cloud, in the case of the Enterprise Manager, the Control-M server, and so forth, that I would be able to leverage not only the compute and the image piece of that deployment, but also utilize the RDS component, where I could actually have it service or use a platform as a service database in the case of Oracle or Postgres supplied by Amazon instead of it being supplied by you, the customer, or BMC as part of the original deployment of Control-M. So we spent a lot of time working in that environment, and we actually do now support the Amazon AWS RDS deployments of Oracle and Postgres for the utilization of, or having it as the database management system behind the Enterprise Manager and the Control-M server. When we think about some of those installations now for version 9 of Control-M, on the support and electronic product distribution tool, you now have 2 individual distributions for cloud support. So you will actually see out there line items that say Control-M with cloud support for Windows, Control-M with cloud support for Linux. Obviously, again, we're using RDS with Postgres and Oracle if you decide to use them. The versions that are cloud-enabled right now also include FixPack 1 of the Control-M server and FixPack 2 of the Enterprise Manager automatically. And there's also some post-patch related configurations that the installation includes that were manual prior to this past September. When we look at EPD, this is what you'll find out there. Right now, there are 4 specific distributions out there for cloud support. Now, understand the thought process behind this is to provide you an installation capability that you would actually do the install on your AWS images with. We'll talk a little bit about some of the other things that we're doing in the AWS and Azure areas as well, but the primary focus of this is to give you a specific install package that is specifically built to work in the cloud. So you will actually download this, bring the image to the the install image to the cloud machine, and then you would do the typical installs like you would see when you do Control-M on-premise. But we will give you options in the installer to actually select if you're going to put down a hard database yourself, or you're going to use an RDS-enabled database from Amazon, in this case the screenshot being Postgres or Oracle. So again, we're trying very hard to give you options about how you get Control-M into the cloud. If you intend on using the Enterprise Manager and the Control-M server on-premise, and the only thing you want to put in the cloud is the Control-M agent, again, that can be done as well. It's a common configuration that we have. We have people that run the Control-M server in the cloud, the agents in the cloud, and the EM on-premise. We've had different types of mixes, and we've had different types of things happen for those that are going through this evolution to a cloud-based data center. When we think about that cloud enablement, we've also done some things to the front end of Control-M when we get into the cloud. One of the things that obviously we do need to manage is getting access to things like the desktop client, getting access to the automation API, and things of that sort. So what we've done with the cloud-enabled versions of Control-M is we've actually put in a new start page where you have links that would be available to get those assets from the cloud-deployed Enterprise Manager and bring them down to your on-premise desktop, for example. Now, understand that when you do this install, and you do it into the cloud, it does do the base Control-M core components. If you are licensed for things like Workload Change Manager or self-service or managed file transfer or the Workload Archive, those things are still subsequent installations that you will have to do after that point. It's not all bundled together because we do have to think of the entitlements that your license gives you. So as you can see in some of these things, like self-service Workload Change Manager, they're actually saying that you are not licensed for this add-on. If you were to have enabled that in the Enterprise Manager after doing the initial cloud installation, those things would change and would have links to get to those individual assets on the cloud-supported version. Just so you know, this page is going to become more prevalent for all of the installation types of Control-M. So regardless of whether it's cloud or on-prem, as we continue to move through the process of evolving the product, this front-end screen will actually start making its way into all of the installation distributions of Control-M. So you'll see this more often than just the cloud deployment. We also make sure that you have access to the online help from here, watching the videos that are available as well. Those are all things that are part and parcel of that start page that is part of the cloud-enabled version of Control-M, and we'll be moving to all of the distributions as we go. When we think about some of the other things that people were asking us to do, they said, you know what, we really don't have the time to do this kind of install, that we really would rather go out to things like the Amazon Marketplace or the Azure Marketplace and get an already configured version of Control-M, meaning that I don't want to have to worry about where the EM is, where the Control-M server is, and all that other stuff and do the installs myself, that I could actually go out, have Amazon spin something up for me, and I would be able to have a right-away available Control-M. So we started working on that toward the end of 2016, and we are now providing, as the goal states, a full Control-M stack in the cloud marketplaces that you can use for any type of deployment. So if you wanted to use it on a sandbox, as a test environment, as even your production environment, you can go to the Amazon Marketplace, search out Control-M, and actually spin up an environment. So what we did is, in working with our friends at Amazon, we said we want to put together a single server AMI that's Linux. It will have the Control-M core product and some of the select control modules, meaning that they will already have deployed things like SAP, PeopleSoft, things like that, on the agent that would run on the Control-M server. Again, because we support RDS and AWS, you have the ability to use the it will use either the Postgres RDS if you select that as part of the configuration for the spin-up of the AMI, or you can have it actually build one with an embedded Postgres SQL database. The marketplace version of Control-M will not utilize Oracle at this point. We started with Postgres because that's the database that we found easiest to get into the marketplace. The licensing for the AWS Marketplace version of Control-M is bring your own license, meaning that we don't necessarily care that you want to run things in the cloud, but you will be governed by the license that you have with Control-M today. So if you have a task-based license and you spin up a Amazon Marketplace version of Control-M and you're using it for a sandbox or for testing, we will be looking for information from that cloud-deployed Control-M when we go through the statement of compliance. We'll talk a little bit about conversions for CPU-based licenses as well, because that is also a bring-your-own-license model. But ultimately, the AWS Marketplace version of Control-M is not changing how we manage to the licenses that you've had with Control-M going forward or in the past. We've also spent some time working with Microsoft. Our first foray into Azure was more agent-based because that's what customers were asking us for. We really don't want to continue to do these hard installs. We'd rather you go out to the marketplace and have a agent extension in the Azure marketplace that we could call and have installed. That's the first thing that we've done, and that is available out there today. We are working with Microsoft now to get a Azure marketplace version of Control-M in their marketplace, where we've been diligently working on that. We're hoping to have that out soon. However, that does not exist today as of this webinar, and I have not been given any information from R&D when that project will be completed. But ultimately, we are, as our goal states, going to provide a full-up stack of Control-M on both the marketplaces so that you don't have to necessarily worry about the install process as well. The thing that you have to remember about this is that it spins up the core components. If you have self-service, if you have Workload Change Manager, if you have, the typical add-ons that you would have as extra things that you added to your license, you will still have to go to that AWS version and enable those and make those available in the normal way. If you have control modules that you want to deploy on agents in the environment, there are some that will be deployed as part of the regular agent configuration on the Control-M server. Anywhere else that you want Control-M to control workload, you will install agents on those machines. If they need to have control modules on those agents, you'll have to do those installs as well. So we're putting up the base version of Control-M, the EM, the Control-M server, and a single agent, and then you would manage the rest of the infrastructure as you normally would. And to give you an idea of what that looks like, this is the typical AWS Marketplace listing for Control-M. And as you can see, you have the ability to go through and pick what region this AMI should be spun up on, if it's going to be a single AMI or Control-M in an AWS diagram, and you spring your own license. It's quite simple. And as you go through the continue pieces of this, it will ask you the appropriate questions about, are you going to use RDS Postgres? Do you want to use an embedded Postgres, and so forth? And then it will go out and build the AMI for you and give you access to it. And then, of course, when we think about the Azure piece of it, there is, in the Azure Marketplace, the Control-M agent extension. To install the extension, once you click on Create, it'll actually ask you for the Control-M host, the port numbers, the host group name if there is one that needs to be included, and a user account on that infrastructure for it to build that agent via the extension for you. And again, that's something that exists in Azure today. The Azure Marketplace version of Control-M on Azure is, again, still being built, and to this date, we're not sure when that's going to be completed. So here are some of the common questions that we get about cloud implementations for Control-M. The first one being, are there any special requirements or prerequisites for a cloud deployment on a public cloud? And absolutely, there is not any. Now, granted, we've discussed the fact that we've already put in a special installation distribution of Control-M that is cloud-enabled for AWS. The expectation is that once we finish the Azure Marketplace piece of control, I should say the Azure Marketplace piece of Control-M, that we will also have an enhancement to that installation CD for any special things that we want to work with Azure. This is a version 9 Control-M. I can install this on any cloud infrastructure. It doesn't necessarily have to be AWS or Azure. So if we're talking about Google or some of the others, I can do that as well. In those infrastructures, there are some manual steps that we would have to go through to finish the configuration of Control-M in a Google type of cloud scenario. But we are, at this point, and have been for many moons, very much cloud agnostic. We really don't care that we're in the cloud. It's just that we have to do some things to make sure that we do the right install steps and configuration steps to make everything work. But ultimately, we want everybody to remember, there's nothing special that you need to do to get Control-M in the cloud. We're just trying to give you more options about how you get Control-M into the cloud, not the fact that Control-M needs to do something special to be in the cloud. second question we always get is, will there be a SaaS solution available for Control-M? And right now, our folks in product management and R&D are looking at this quite hard. And we're talking to a lot of customers, looking at the marketplace to see what exactly folks are looking for in a SaaS model for workload automation. Right now, we're formulating what that direction is. There isn't a specific, straightforward declaration that Control-M may or may not be a SaaS solution in the future, because there are certain things that we have to think about operationally as well, about how the software would be managed, upgraded, and things like that. So those are the things that we're looking at right now as part of that assessment of whether or not Control-M would be a good SaaS solution. But some of the things that we're adding to the next release of Control-M really are built to address some of the TCO issues that have been identified as people use Control-M and people manage it, whether it's in the cloud or on-prem. And a lot of those things are about upgrades and how when we move from release to release, version 8 to version 9 and so forth, that there's quite an uplift in how we get to that version. We're working right now on the next release, which will be called 9.0.18. And a lot of the things that we've heard from customers about upgrades are expected to be remedies and to start being more in-place upgrades instead of uplifts to new infrastructure. And make sure that when we do those, that we provide them with as close to no downtime as we can possibly get. We're also making some changes in how we deploy the plugins for the control modules in the case of the ones that enable SAP PeopleSoft databases and so forth. We are now going to create a application integration bundle, meaning that all the control modules will be bundled together in one install. And then after you install that package, you just enable the ones that you want to use on that individual agent. And that also will give us capability to, for all of those things that change with the forms that go along with job definition, to have the enterprise manager give those to the clients en masse instead of those things that we used to do where we had to do them one by one when those changes occurred. When we think about things like what add-ons are offered in the AWS marketplace right now, as we said before, it is the base conversion of Control-M. If you have Workload Change Manager licensed or Managed File Transfer or Workload Archiving or any of those are not enabled in the AWS marketplace version of Control-M. If you wanted to use them, you would need to go into that deployment and enable them in the normal fashion using the enablement distributions from the electronic product download section of the support page. So again, just wanted to make sure that everybody understands that you're not going to get everything, that you're only going to get those things that you're licensed for, and there will be a small amount of configuration work that may need to be done to enable those things that you're already licensed for in a cloud deployment. And then pricing. A lot of the questions that we get is, because we're in the cloud, are we going to change the pricing model? The answer to that is no. We're not introducing any new pricing just because you're in the cloud. The bring your own license model is going to be the one that we are supporting going forward, meaning that you could spin up the Amazon Marketplace version of Control-M. By default, that image will run for 14 days without a license key. At day 14, if you don't have a license key, Control-M will shut down. So if you're going to use Control-M in the cloud and you use the AWS Marketplace image as part of the bring your own license capability, we will provide you with a key to keep the infrastructure running, and then you will be subject to the license terms that you already have with us for Control-M in the case of tasks that you utilize or CPUs that are attached to your license. For those that are CPU-based, that they're not task-based, but they're actually CPU capacity-based, we have put in some definitions for your license models to understand what a CPU is to us when we have you, or should you deploy into the cloud. So if you are in AWS, or if you decide to deploy in a regular way, you do the install in an AWS environment and not use the marketplace version, one CPU for your license is equal to one virtual CPU in the Amazon environment. For those that are running Azure, whether they're running the agent extension or they're actually doing a standard deployment of the product in the Azure cloud, for one CPU, that is 4 virtual cores in the Azure environment. So those will be the measurements we will be using going forward to ascertain the CPU utilization that you are using against Control-M or against your Control-M license versus the compute that you are using in the cloud infrastructure. The other questions that we get are always about networking. How do we handle different types of network configurations? What kind of security do we have to worry about? And right now, to be very general about it, obviously AWS has several methods of getting an on-prem network working with a cloud network. Direct Connect is rather standard, as is a VPC or a VPN. But ultimately, Control-M needs to be able to connect to a network. And when I call out to a host, I expect it to connect me to that host. So we do expect that the networks between the cloud infrastructure and the on-premise network would be connected together for management of assets on the on-prem network, and that the network would be connected so that anybody who would be using the desktop client or self-service, for that matter, would have access to the assets in the cloud. A couple of best practices that we've been talking to folks about are about securing the tunnels between the components. So when we think about managing or at least getting work to an agent or getting communication going back and forth from the desktop client, in the cloud scenario, just for safety's sake, it's probably best to utilize SSL between those components. That gives you one extra level of security other than what the VPC, the VPN, or the Direct Connect in the case of Amazon would give you to connect between Control-M in the cloud and something on-premise. We've also had people actually start asking if it's good to have a persistent connection between Control-M and or Control-M server and the agents. If that is something that is become critical for you because there have been networking glitches between the cloud environment and the on-prem environment, obviously that would benefit you because the pipe would always be open and the Control-M server would always have the ability to connect downstream. So all of those things are available to you as regular functions of Control-M, but it would behoove you to at least examine to make the communications more secure between the Control-M components and more network available in the case of persistent connection should the VPC, VPN type of thing be having some kind of issue. We've also gotten questions about the hybrid cloud environment, and can we actually manage those things that are in the cloud from on-prem and vice versa? And the answer is always yes. We don't care how you configure this situation, whether you want to run Control-M in the cloud and have it connect to on-prem resources or vice versa. We can do all of those things. So you have the flexibility to design your environment to be inclusive of cloud-based assets going forward. There's nothing special that you have to do if you want to run Control-M on-prem and select or utilize the cloud-based infrastructures for agents and processing and things like that. The only thing that we have to remember is the network requirement so that Control-M can call out to the cloud to access those cloud-based images. A couple of things that we wanted to make sure that we remember about moving to the cloud. Obviously, we've talked a little bit about the install packages that are cloud-enabled. We're going to continue to enhance those installs and upgrade processes for those in individual distributions as we go. So we're spending a lot of time with that today. as part of our ongoing R&D. We're going to be doing some database as a service support for Amazon AWS RDS and all of the other databases that it supports. So right now, as we've discussed earlier, we support the RDS versions of Postgres and Oracle. We are looking at all of the others to see what others we need to support. We are also going to be doing some work with the install and upgrades for Azure, as we've discussed earlier, and we're also going to put in some database support for the Azure support for the Azure SQL database, much like the RDS is available in AWS. Our friends in Microsoft make the SQL Server available as a platform as a service as well in the Azure cloud. We are also making sure that that marketplace piece continues to be easy to get to. We also discussed briefly that we will have a copy of Control-M in the Azure marketplace. Again, we are working on that diligently to get that finished up, and once we do, we'll announce that as well. But the AWS marketplace is the full base stack of Control-M that you can fire up at any time with bring your own licenses, the back end for managing to the licensing that is available for Control-M. We also have had for many, many years the Cloud Control module. A lot of folks that ask us about cloud have not asked us a lot about the management of cloud assets. And we have had for, I want to say, almost 5 years now, a control module that works with the cloud assets already. So if you wanted to use Control-M to do some of the management or the startup or shutdown, for example, of VMware assets or Amazon EC2 assets, or even working with our own BladeLogic tool to run jobs to do specific functions on BladeLogic to do things like provisioning or patching or things like that, Control-M has already had integrations for those individual systems for a very long time, and we wanted to make sure that everybody knew that that module existed. The reason why that becomes important is that if I have Control-M in the cloud infrastructure, I may want to have the elasticity available to me as well, where I have the ability to call the control module while I'm deployed in Amazon and say, okay, this is the end of the month, I need more compute. Go out and spin up 2 or 3 or 4 more images on Amazon, install the agent, bring those into the environment so that I can run all of my work because I have a higher volume at the end of the month versus the volume I have at the middle of the week or whatever it happens to be. So those things have always been available in Control-M today. In the case of VMware, it's the typical asset type of actions. I'm going to power something on, power something off. I'm going to take a snapshot. I'm going to do some kind of configuration task. I'm going to add CPUs, add RAM, whatever it happens to be, to an on-premise VMware environment. And for AWS, for Amazon EC2, I can create, start, stop, reboot, terminate Amazon AMI images. So again, the idea here is to give you the ability to use Control-M to manage the elasticity of the environment, to actually have it grow or shrink based on your operating requirement. And of course, we also work with the BMC BladeLogic tool for a lot of those things that we do for running jobs in that environment and doing things like service-aware patching and things like that, using BladeLogic as the core engine to do those types of things. To give you a couple of views on what those things look like, these are the typical views of functions that I can call in Control-M. Obviously, on the left-hand side, in the upper left-hand corner, I have the ability to do a creative in AMI, which is there in the upper left, giving it the number of copies, the availability zone, the instance types, and things like that. Starting in the bottom left, actually just starting an existing AMI that's already been built. And of course, we also have the ability to work with the AWS CLI. A lot of the things that we have been doing with the application integrator component of Control-M to instrument Control-M for those things that we don't have a common control module for are also available here. In this case, we have an example that allows us to call the AWS CLI and ask and give commands to that CLI to work with specific things in AWS, in this case associating an instance address with a public IP. But the point being is that Control-M is flexible enough, even in the management of cloud, to be that vehicle that provides that kind of elasticity. And when we think about working with VMware for snapshotting tasks in the upper left-hand corner, configuration tasks in the bottom left-hand corner, and in the upper right-hand corner, those become very, very important if I have a hybrid cloud type of scenario where I'm utilizing physical assets that have been virtualized on VMware and also working with cloud assets that may be on Azure or out on AWS. Control-M can handle all of those things. And then, of course, along the bottom right there, the ability to run a BladeLogic job. We just wanted to make sure that you had all of that information available to you as an understanding of the full cloud offering that Control-M provides, along with just the fact that it does run in the cloud and some of the things that we've discussed about being in the marketplaces and things like that. So that's where we will stop for today. I do have about 20 minutes left in the hour. We wanted to entertain any questions that you might have. For those of you that have muted your phone using *6, you can unmute your phone using *6 as well. And I will take any questions that you have at this time. It would be helpful if you would say who you are so I can at least address you by name, and then what your question is. So feel free to ask any questions at this time.
Hi, Dave. This is Mike Spears from JP Morgan.
Hi, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing good. I was wondering if you see any benefits, pros or cons, to installing an agent in the cloud versus using a remote host for cloud applications.
Well, obviously, the same things that we have with an on-premise use of remote host versus agents also applies to the cloud. So the remote host connection really is a very effective way of handling specific connectivity to a machine where I'm only going to run a script or command. I can't really do anything else over it. I can't do any file watching. I can't do any hosting of the control modules. I really can't do anything over a remote host connection other than run a script or command and record what happened on the other side. If that's all you need to do, then a remote host connection to an AMI image out in the cloud is very possible and has been used by some customers to enable their executions in the cloud. But if we need more robust capability in that cloud image where I need to do file watching, for example, or if I want to put a control module there, it is a requisite to have the agent there to handle those more advanced functions. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Thank you. That answers my question.
Okay. Are there any other questions that I can entertain? Any questions at all that I can add, that I can answer about anything in Control-M, not just things in the cloud? All right, seeing none, then I will return about 15 minutes to your day. I thank you very much for spending your time with me today. This webinar has been recorded, and there will be a recording link passed out as well. It will be part of our webinar page in the coming days. Again, thank you for spending your time, and I wish you a good afternoon. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.